whatever you did, if it wasn't good enough, you needed to try and do better and keep at it.
Actually, village life produces the philosophical ideas that are germane to democratic thought and practice.
I mean, just losing 4 of your bandmates, soulmates is bad enough. But the worst thing is, out of those 4 families, 2 of the families blamed me.
But the progress from 1991 to 2017, I think, only took India to a better place.
It was really through the transition into politics that I had the good luck of becoming a writer.
May I request Geetanjali Shree to read a brief passage in English. The Hindi passage will come afterwards of the book so that you get an idea of what Ret Samadhi is all about. I have a copy here if you want.
I thought I would stand, but clearly
There's no stand.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. How am I going to read? I don't know. But no. I'll manage. I'll try and make it brief, but it'll still be 3 or 4 minutes. And it's a little scene about the family in India. And it tells you just very little about the book, but I hope it stirs your curiosity. anything we say about the Mahabharata could also be said about families. They contain all that exists in the world, and whatever they don't contain doesn't exist. Not even in the imagination of a poet. That is, the gone astray terrorist, the hot-headed leftist, the female and the feminist, the everythingist and the opti-pessimist, all in the family, or in the Mahabharata, whichever you prefer. The world is in the Mahabharata, the world is in the family, and thus the Mahabharata is in the family. The daily flare-ups, each one a Mahabharata. For this reason, every member of the family knows that what exists in me exists in no one else, and what does not exist in me has no call to exist. And that I have the brain, others have the money. And that everyone has taken advantage of me, so from now on, I won't do anything, let the rest of them do it. And that I'm the most tender-hearted despite living far away, while you are right here, yet so completely inconsiderate. And I'm always the giver, and you're always the taker. And wow, your wheeling dealings are just because you're such a friendly soul. But if I do the same, I'm cold and calculating. When you are quiet, you're polite. But when I'm quiet, I'm wily. If you did it, it's good etiquette. If I do, it's fawning flattery. If you say it, it's candid. If I do, it's just rude. If I ask, it's obscene curiosity. When you do, it's sympathy. If I do it, it's for my own convenience. If you do, you are most beneficent. If I do it, I'm being stingy. If you do it, you're being thrifty. If I'm quiet, I'm acting proud. If you are quiet, you feel bashful. I'm extremely secretive, but you are just reserved. And my fashions are for, whereas yours are cutting edge. And if I lose something, what's the big deal? But if you do, you've been robbed, woe is me. And if I do something, it amounts to nothing, but your merest intention of doing something amounts to actually doing it. That is, I am what I've done. You are what you've thought. And what I said was scornful, but when you said it, it was just a joke. When I said my piece, I was being a show-off, but when you had your say, it was the unvarnished truth. And if I got it, I grabbed it. But if you got it, it was your right. And if I said it, I was deluded. But if you said it, you were just right. And when I get angry, I'm humorless. But when you do, it's self-respect. And when I went and did it, it was my duty. But when you did, it was big of you. And when I'm successful, I got help from you. But when you're unsuccessful, it was me who threw a spanner in the works. And if I get stuck, I'm a slacker. But if you get stuck, you blew your chances. And oh yes, if I don't get it, I'm a moron. But if you don't, you're innocent. And oh yes, if you're enemies with me, I deserve it. But if I'm with you, I'm jealous. And oh yes, if I did it, I'm self-serving. If you did, you're self-effacing. And if I don't do it, it's carelessness. But if you don't, it's helplessness. And however much I've done it is not enough. And whatever little you do is plenty. And if my nose is crooked, it's ugly. And if your eye is crooked, it's artistic. And oh yes, if I look good in a picture, the photographer was gifted. But if you look good, it's because you're beautiful. And oh yes, if I'm fair, I look like a skinned quail. And if you are pale, you look like a foreigner. If I'm dark, I'm Mr. Eggplant Head. Whereas when you do, black is beautiful. If I'm fat, I'm Tubby Tupkins. If you're fat, you're pleasingly plump. If I'm thin, I'm dry as a stick. If you're skinny, you're svelte and shapely. And if I turn on the AC, I'm decadent. But if you do, you suffer from delicate health. When I drink, I'm drunk. When you drink, doctor's orders. If speak in English, I'm giving myself airs. If you do, you're educated. Oh, and if you need it, we are all one big family. But when I need it, you're separate and alone. If I'm polite, it's pretentious. If you are, it's pedigree. If I live by the fruits of my labor, I'm a crude drudge. But when you cling like a leech, it's a cultural custom. And yes, your work is the bee's knees, but mine's a hobby, if you please. Thank you.
To Towards the end of this session, I'm going to request Geetanjali Shree to read this same passage or bits of it in Hindi because it has such a different flavor in Hindi. And I do want the taste of that language with you. Now, there are so many questions I want to ask. It's best to plunge into them straight away. Your novel begins with the line, "A tale tells itself." The style is so playful, so plastic, the substance deeply literary and philosophical. For those in the audience who may not have had time to yet, they probably just buying the books and waiting for you to sign them. Tell us about the book, about the story, the backstory. I know you hate sort of putting this fat book into a few lines. Just let's compare the the British version, my dear. Oh, she's preparing. So this is the tilted axis one from here. This is, as you can see, there's the Hindi one. So putting this into a short little sentence or two is what she's going to do now. Tell us.
The best sentences I'm going to have when the event is over, but since you ask me now, I'll try. Namita gave me an idea of the things she's going to ask, so I tried making a few points, but I know that I'm still going to bungle it up. It's not easy for me to talk about my work because I don't, I don't follow a very clear-cut theme or a simple linear storyline. I work in quite another way, and I want to remember with you one of our greats, A.K. Ramanujan, who has written somewhere, I can't remember his exact words, but he says that he doesn't chase the poem. He just puts himself in a place and a moment where the poem can reach him if it wants to. So I think that is really, something I like to do with myself. There are stories everywhere, inside me, all around me, everywhere. And in fact, the word samadhi makes a lot of sense to me because I think these stories go into samadhi and they're waiting just to be stirred up by something and they'll come out. So what I like to do when I'm writing is to place myself in that position where the stories will begin to emerge on their own. Now so that's why I don't find it easy ever to talk about, any work of mine. However, when I was writing this book, I think I was sitting in my solitude and a small image, I'm just talking of the trigger that got me going. This was the image of an elderly woman in a family. And I think it's a common enough image across the world of an elderly woman, bedridden, who is bored, it seems, of life, feels completely useless, has no reason it would look anymore to live, and she's ready to die. And this image of the back stayed with me, and it stirred up my curiosity. And in stirring up my curiosity, it stirred up my intuition, which is made up of so many things, or my memories, my observations, things I've been through, my history, my geography, God knows what all. And I began to wonder whether this woman was actually turning her back on life or whether she was boring a hole into the wall towards which she had turned to get out on the other side and reinvent herself and start another life. And sure enough, that is what the woman started to do. And then it was about interaction between the protagonist and the author, where she became more and more free and audacious and desirous and made me the same. So every time she stepped out and we came across borders and she would skip across. When she did that, I was inspired to do the same. And so we went along on this adventure across uncharted territory and very sort of variegated terrain, and the book unfolded. And I think it became this book.
It is, as you will read it, a very audacious and a very unexpected book and a very experimental book. And there have been not so many experimental books in Hindi. There have been a few like Ragdar Bari, so many, but this is, it's a milestone because the playful way in which she plays with narrative form and does what she pleases. So Arunav, I want to ask you this. I've read The Tomb of Sand in English and Ret Samadhi in Hindi, possibly one of the finest translations I've ever encountered. You described it as a tongue-shifting masterpiece. Yet it struck me they're almost two masterpieces. Your views on Daisy Rockwell's remarkable accomplishment in making a very rooted, nuanced Hindi magnum opus accessible to the larger world.
Yes. As you will have made out from the passage that Geetanjali read, this is a novel that you need to hear. It's not just something that you need to read with your eyes. And this is a novel that takes no prisoners where translation is concerned. You either triumph or you will die in the attempt. You cannot come out with something that's half-baked. So, and it resides not just in the meaning of the words. That is, most fiction tends to do that with a little bit of sound and music thrown in. Here, this novel resides in its words and its music and its sound. And the meaning is almost, if not secondary, but it runs only in parallel. So what Daisy has done is to take all the sounds and dhwani, as she calls it, and the music that resides in the Hindi language and taken it into a language that has nothing in common, English. And she has done it in a way that you hear so many notes, so many different cadences, volumes, voices, and it's the most extraordinary act of creation. And in some ways, with all due respect to authors of original works, translators sometimes become even more creative than the writer of the original because they work within constraints. The author can do anything they want. The translator cannot. The translator has to write the book that has already been written and has to do it in a way that is as much as possible the same way as the original book, except it's in a completely different language and moreover in a completely unconnected cultural space. And then when you stop to think of the fact that Daisy is an American who learned Hindi and Urdu and translated this book, the achievement becomes all the more miraculous. And just like, I think books like this, yes, just like books like this come maybe once or twice in your lifetime, Geetanjali. I mean, I know you'll write more great books, but this one will be hard to parallel in any way. I think even translators produce works like that. Once in a lifetime or twice in a lifetime, they'll produce this incredible work of translation. And that's what Daisy's done here.
Do you want to add anything to that, Geetanjali, on the process of the book and its second and third lives in especially this English translation?
Actually, I would like to say a few things if I'll be allowed to. I think we must stress also the fact that translations are themselves, a dialogue that goes across borders, but it's a two-way process. And I do want to stress that because, very often we talk about these two books as if they are two different books. And I think while it is correct that Ret Samadhi, through Tomb of Sand, has gone into another world, let us also remember that Tomb of Sand or Ret Samadhi through Tomb of Sand has introduced another world to this world. So I think that's one thing which also needs to be stressed. And finally, I hope I'm not going to be misunderstood, but I also want to say, however creative a translation, let us remember, Anna Karenina will always be Anna Karenina in any translation, and if it is not, then I think we will question the translator. That's all.
Absolutely. I mean, if I may add, my point about being creative is not in creating something new.
No, sure.
But in being able to create exactly the same thing in a different, as close as possible as the same thing in a different language.
No, sure. I just thought that, it should be seen in context.
So let's discuss some of the unforgettable characters in the book. The mother, her daughter, referred to only as Beti, the mysterious Rosie / Raza master who negotiates genders, identities, histories, with absolutely, I mean, she remains an enigma all the way, and so many others. At one level, the story is about mothers and daughters. Then there is the brother. The love between a parent and a child can make God fade into the background, you say. And then at one point when they leave for Pakistan, you say, as at 80, Ma had turned selfish. And I wonder how many mothers do decide to turn selfish at 80, because they've done it. The pressures of masculinity that operate within Indian families, and the Indian family itself in which this book is embedded. Tell us about the characters and where they are situated.
Well, Namita, you've said so many, many things that I don't think I can respond to every single one. Yeah, well, but you have, I mean, you've talked about, yeah. At one level, the book is about the same things that every book is about. It's about love and relationships and friendships and loss and sadness and death. These characters and these relationships living in our cruel world and negotiating life and managing some things and not managing others. But the other thing is, it's set in the family, but family is nothing limiting. Family is a microcosm of what goes on in the entire world. So really everything goes on here. And I think the book, it describes everyday, collisions of sort of very ordinary, everyday occurrences. But those themselves throw out, I think, very long shadows which take us back into history, take us back into momentous events, take us back into traumatic events in our history and other things. And there's an image in the book which I was remembering this morning where this shrunken old lady, she's standing there and it's the time of the day when our shadows are long. And this little figure has a really long shadow. And for me, that was a metaphor of, how the ordinary contains so much which is unordinary, or how something small and limited contains so many other things in it. So that is, this character has in her so many stories which connect her to the immediate family, but also take her back to the partition years and to stories on the other side of the border. But now I'm coming to, I don't know if I'm jumping, you'll have to ask me again if I've left something behind. But about her becoming selfish at the age of 80, somebody recently asked me something like this. She or he had read some of my works, and she said, why are your women protagonists always old? So something which I had not thought about, and that made me wonder. And I began to think that maybe, women actually are caught up in so many performances and roles and insecurities in their, early and very long years. And it's only when they actually start becoming older that they are able to turn selfishly to themselves. And I thought maybe that is what, inspires me, that it's now time for her to think only of herself and nobody else. And so this woman at 80 turned selfish and wanted to go to Pakistan and, revive her story which had stayed buried all this time. I don't know, what else? Yeah.
So the process of self-discovery of this older lady who seemed to have given up on life, this process of self-discovery leads to self-discoveries within her family and within the histories, the conjoined histories of India and Pakistan and the past. It is extraordinary. But on another level, I see many people from an Indian background here. This book is a tribute to Indian literature, even more than it is about the literary family across Indian languages. It has deep references to the entire pantheon, the canon of contemporary Indian, especially Hindi writers. her loving dedication is to Krishna Sopti, who is a writer she has treated as a muse almost. You'll have to tell us a little about Krishna Sopti, even as you invoke Paul Zakaria, Maitri Pushpa, Sara Rai, Mohan Rakesh, Vinod Kumar Shukla, so many others. They're writers, painters, musicians from every part of India and Pakistan who are heard here. Intizar Hussain. It is, so tell us whatever you feel like. Let this be for 5 minutes we are moving away from the immediate novel to the subtext of the novel, which is a homage to the literatures that have made you.
I think it's a homage to my world, which is pluralistic and polyphonic. My world, which seems also to be threatened by a world which increasingly wants to become monocultural and monolinguistic, and and is propelled by dictatorial impulses as well. So I think it's really, in some senses, a homage and sort of expressing sadness for in fear that we might be losing that world. So I think it's more than just the literature. It's really about the unity of everything. I mean, it's literature certainly, because these are the writers who I read and who inspired me, and who are my co-writers like Sarah and Paul, etc. But it's also very much the world which has the values that have nurtured me, and I want very much to preserve. So I think that is what came into the making of the book. And and in the process, I think I realized the connectedness of everything, the connectedness of all creatures, connectedness of humans and creatures, and even of inanimate objects. So when in the book, for instance, the Grand Trunk Road, which anybody who knows India would know what role it has played for centuries in our history. When I was describing that road, and I thought of the things which happen on that road, where kafila nikalte hain, or there's merrymaking, and there is trade, and there's bloodshed, and so many, things happen on that road. How can that road just be whatever it is made of, coal and tar and cement, or whatever it's made of? How can it be just that? It surely, it comes alive, and it is a witness to many things, and it feels happy and it feels sad. So everything in the book became a character for that reason, and it was really that world which just stirred up in me and inspired me and entered the book.
So I hope you won't think I'm straying from the subject. It just struck me that Krishna Sopti was one of our great writers, but if you could, she was also a bit like the old lady in the mother. Just let the audience know a little bit about Krishna Sopti, as to get a glimpse into Indian literature, and just 2 or 3 lines.
She's the grand dame of Hindi literature, certainly. She died a few years ago in her, I think she was 95. And Krishna ji came from across the border, and she never accepted the border. So she's really, one of those. There is a scene in the book on the Wagah border, where the writers are standing all confused because they don't know which side they belong to, and they don't accept that border. So Krishna ji was very much, that writer coming from Lahore, full of what that side was and this side is. And she was a woman who, completely no-nonsense writer, wrote any way she pleased, and wrote powerfully, and wrote many kinds. So she's written a lot, and each work is like a gem in its own right. And Krishna ji was also politically an extremely aware and I won't even say courageous. That was just her. She had to say what she felt and she thought, and she was fearless. She did not, she wouldn't kowtow to anybody. So she was one of those few writers where the literature and the writer were equally strong.
I really hope there are publishers sitting in the audience, there are readers sitting in the audience. I hope Sunday Krishna Sopti is also read
Absolutely.
and celebrated
Absolutely.
here in the UK in translation.
Absolutely.
My next question is, and this is a question I know you don't particularly welcome, because you always look a bit irritated when you are asked this one, but I'll ask you anyway. The main, one of the binaries or the polarities or whatever, the contradictions in India is between the elite and privileged English speakers and those who are more into Indian languages. And often, even those with a little bit of access to the twice-born language of English then abandon their mother tongues, whatever they may be, and choose to write in the language which they think will get them more fame. Now they may change their mind, but and at what stage, why, how did you decide to write in Hindi rather than English and to publish in Hindi rather than English when you had access to both the languages and the worlds they contain?
Yeah, first of all, Namita, I could never be irritated by you. Yeah. This question I have been asked many, many times, and I think it says everything about the ex-colonial country we are, that, people ask me why I'm writing in my mother tongue and not in a foreign language. So I don't think I get irritated. I usually get amused. Well, not irritated, but I think there's something sad as well out there, but this is our skewed history. What do we do? About my choice of Hindi, I don't think I was really choosing. I think if I sound fairly fluent in English doesn't mean that I'm really equipped to do creative writing in English. I'm certain I'm not. And I think when it comes to creative expression, we do use a medium which is somehow inside us and in our blood in a, I don't know if the word is right, prenatal sort of way. So I think I discovered or I realized that it was Hindi that was inside me, and I just had to rediscover it and pull it out. And that is what I did, and slowly I went that way, and I never regretted it. And as I don't think anybody, at least I don't know how many writers decide they will write in a particular language because it will get them fame. I think we write in the language we can write in. So that is how I fell to Hindi.
So, although Geetanjali is an old friend, although I've done a similar conversation with her, but not quite, but I kept reading up interviews and things just to do my homework, and I came across this very sweet story about your first short story in Hindi and a train journey. Tell us, because it will give us an insight into how the creative process began. Just tell us about that.
Well, it was, for many years, I think, for many, many years, I think right into my college days, I just thought I was a writer and I was going to be a writer. But there were other struggles in life. One had to think about what career I'm going to choose and which language am I going to write in. I don't know what all worries one had. So I wasn't writing. I was doing everything else but not writing. And I think it was while I've also done a PhD in history, which I don't remember. Yeah. But...
So Dr. Geetanjali Shree.
Yeah, well, I told you, last birth. Yeah. But I think it was in the train. I had gone to submit my thesis. And I was sitting in the train, and I think I was in my mid-20s or late 20s. And I don't know why it suddenly struck me that I've been thinking all these years that I'm actually primarily a writer, but where is the writing? So that worried me a little, and I pulled out some paper and I started writing a story. And I finished that story and I showed it in the morning to my husband. And he was surprised because it didn't look like a first story. It must have been terrible because I never kept it. I don't even remember what it is. But it didn't feel like an absolutely first attempt. And that story made me feel, well, I have it in me and I better get going. That's what happened in the train.
So next time everybody around here is on trains all the time,
Try.
try. The motion keeps you going.
Yeah, who knows?
This one is for Arunav. Daisy Rockwell, being invoked here so much, is quoted on Twitter as saying, I like to think of the translator and the author as ballroom dancers. The author is Fred Astaire, and the translator is Ginger Rogers. To which someone responded, Fred Astaire was great, but don't forget that Ginger Rogers did everything he did, backwards and in high heels. Aruna, what is your metaphor for the act of translation? Also, as a multilingual nation with 22 national languages, India itself exists in a continuous and ongoing state of translation, sometimes in high heels, sometimes flat-footed, sometimes barefooted. Tell us, she's just given a 5-minute notice to us, so tell us in 5 minutes, or 3 minutes, or 4 minutes, about the multilinguality around us in India and how it operates, which is invoked so beautifully in her book with all the writers she talks about.
Yes. 5 minutes is a very long time. I must say that Ginger Rogers in high heels is a far better version of the metaphor that I have in my head, which is of a tightrope dancer. I think of the translator as dancing on a tightrope. You can't fall off. It's a very thin rope, but you have to dance. You can't just manage to walk across somehow and get to the other end. And you have to stick to the rope because that is the original work. You can't write a different book at all. So it's a great thing to be able to do, quite honestly, especially if you cannot create that rope yourself. And some people just can't, but give them the rope and they'll start dancing on it. But yes, in India, of course, we live in translation. I mean, it's my firm belief that every Indian every person who lives in India, they don't have to be Indian, anyone who lives in India is a translator because you're forever living between and in the space between languages. You are listening to multiple languages, you're speaking in multiple tongues, you're speaking in multiple versions of the same tongue. You're not even speaking only one version of Hindi or Bangla or Tamil for that matter. And you're doing this effortlessly. And if you also go back to our traditions of storytelling, all of them are works of translation. If you look at something like the way the Ramayana, for example, has been rendered over and over again into different versions with new stories being added, new characters being added, new forms, and brought home to people who have particular languages and may not any longer relate to the language in which the text originally existed, and all of this was done orally. There was no written version. So if there is such a thing as racial memory, then it's there in India, this business of taking things from one language and putting them in another. It comes very naturally. Early in the 20th century, there was such a robust culture of translation between the non-English Indian languages that very often, for example, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, who was translated so copiously from Bangla into Malayalam that people who read Malayalam refused to believe that he was not actually a Malayalam writer. Yeah. And no one felt the need to point it out either. And that, I think, is in a way, I mean, of course, it is taking away credit in a sense from the writer, and it would not be possible in today's world. But in a way, it's also the finest vindication of the quality of that work itself, that it can reside in a different language with people making it their own. I think Muhammad Darwish it was who once said that a child had recited a poem of his, and somebody put it into a book saying that this is the child's poem. And then when the book came out, others jumped down the throat and said, no, this is Muhammad Darwish's poem. And Darwish, when he was told about it, said, it is my dream that every child should recite my poem as though she has written it. And that's translation, right? When it goes out there, let it be home in its new language. And I would really want Tomb of Sand to be read as a book that shows what the English language can do. And then somebody remembers, but wow, it exists because there was Ret Samadhi in Hindi. And tab to Hindi mein bhi nahi. Agar wo nahi hota, to ye nahi hota. But it's fantastic that this is how it gains new lives. And I really hope that many more of the literatures of India go out into languages within India and outside that people can read in the tongue of their choice and not a tongue that's forced down their throat. And, also I will say this, the existence of all of Hindi literature, for example, the writers you've invoked, their existence was a necessary but not a sufficient condition for this book. Without them, perhaps this book may not have been, but this book is itself. This book is not just because there is Hindi, there's all these books, other books in Hindi. This book is because Geetanjali has written this book. And that's something that we really must not forget at any time.
So, before we end this conversation and open up 2 questions from all of you, we have some time for questions, right? So, I was talking to you yesterday or day before, and you said you'd love to see it translated as Samadhi, Ret Samadhi, instead of Tomb of Sand. And I thought about what she said, and the Tomb of Sand is actually inaccurate in some sense, because Samadhi, the word Samadhi, does not mean death. And it does not, the Tomb of Sand implies something that is dead and buried, whereas Ret Samadhi, Ret is sand, which is eternal, endless, reprocessing, and Samadhi is a state of meditative mindlessness, would you say? Was that why you tell us about why you thought it should be Ret Samadhi and what the title means to you, then we'll open for questions.
Just that, it's not, it's a philosophical concept, so I can only just really simplify it and nothing else. But Samadhi is a state of being, which is taking you into transcendence of some kind. And it might be permanent transcendence, or it might be that you go into that state for some time and you will come out. So for me, it became a word which was very evocative and resonant of multiple possibilities. The stories are in Samadhi, for instance. I'll just go back to that again. The story, that every story is in Samadhi. It's not dead. It's not entombed. It is in Samadhi, and when something will stir it up, it will come out from the Samadhi. So for me, Samadhi was a word which brought in another kind of frontier, which is going to be transcended, crossed, bridged. And Tomb didn't get it, but I had that discussion with Daisy and with the publishers, and I relented in the end, and I think it's worked for many, many people also because...
It's worked for you.
For me also, because inside she actually used the word Samadhi quite consistently. So it became, the title in the end becomes something which is there to attract the reader and the buyer. The book is inside.
So I think this conversation with both of you has had so many layers and levels of meaning. I'm going to take 3 questions. Oh, the reading.
Do you want that?
Oh, a line. Me too.
A line.
A little bit from that part you read in English.
As all the moderators say, Sanjoy, we began late, so we'll continue a little more.
Timeless Samadhi.
Yeah, what will you do if we go into Samadhi now?
Okay, I'll just, that's to give you the sound of the language. Yeah. कहना चाहिए परिवार को जबकि कहते हैं महाभारत को कि जो दुनिया में वो उसमें और जो उसमें नहीं वो कहीं नहीं, कवि के तसव्वुर में भी नहीं, यानी भूला भटका आतंकवादी, गर्मा भरमा वामपंथी, नारीवाद और नारी, हरवादी और जीती हारी, सब परिवार में या महाभारत में, जिसे जैसे रुचे पचे। महाभारत में दुनिया, दुनिया परिवार में, और इसलिए परिवार में महाभारत, जो रोज़ रोज़ के हंगाम, हर एक महाभारत। इसलिए परिवार के हर सदस्य को पता है कि जो मुझ में वो किसी में नहीं, और जो मुझ में नहीं वो होने लायक नहीं, और ये कि मेरे पास दिमाग है, औरों के पास पैसा, और ये कि मेरा फ़ायदा उठाया सबने, अब हम नहीं बाकी करें। अच्छा, आपकी ज़रूरत तो हम एक परिवार, हमारी ज़रूरत तो आप अलग और अकेले, हम शरीफ तो मुलम्मा, आप वही तो खानदानी। हम अपनी मेहनत की खाएं तो फूहड़ पंसारी, आप जोंक सा लग जाएं पर संस्कारी। और जी आपका काम काम और हमारा काम तमाम।
Three questions. Where's the mic? Okay, so we'll go 1, 2, 3. Luck of the draw. Simar, come there. Give her the mic. No, we don't want comments. We want short questions. No long comments.
I'll try that. This is probably more for Arunava and Geetanjali. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah, this is more for Arunava and Geetanjali. I mean, I personally believe we are going through a golden phase of Indian literature. I mean, the kind of local languages that are coming out, etc. But you made a very interesting comment as well that there is this whole focus towards monoculturalism as well on the other side. So I kind of see this as a tug of war. On the one hand, that you have local languages that are trying to come out and because of social media, etc. But on the other hand, again, because of social media and potentially politics as well, quite a lot of focus on monoculturalism as well. So where do you see, in your experience, I don't know, in your view, this tug of war probably going?
50 years from now, are we going to be reading our books or are we going to be remembering politician speeches? The answer is very clear.
That's true. Question from the center, right, left, and center. Any question? Here, give the mic here. Do tell us your name as well.
I'm Janaki. Congratulations, Jayashree. I read the English version of the book. First of all, beautiful piece of work. I haven't been able to get hold of the Hindi so far. Hopefully, maybe today we'll find some to pick up. Just a comment on the story first. To me, initially, as I started reading the book, it felt like a series of short stories. And I was going through, and then it's the reflections of the writer which seemed to sort of bind the story together. And it was only towards the end that I found it all making up the har or the necklace and making sense of it towards the end. But I think in a way, the point about partition, the reason for the story is not really the main thing. It could be about anything, but the main character, the Ma, and her transition from one identity to another, and the way she moved through that seemed to be the crux of it, and also several juxtapositions of light and dark, and whether it was religion or gender and sex and identity and all of that. For me, the main thing from the start of it, the key thing was the fluidity. It seemed somehow you couldn't really put your finger on.
We have to have the next. So is there a question or is this a comment?
Just a commentary really.
Right.
To say that the tomb of sand, to me, although the tomb is meant to be from Samadhi, it worked very well with the sand, which is a fluid thing, which indicated movement. So that I always sort of didn't feel the permanence in the tomb, but the fluidity. So just to say the translation worked well as well. So thank you for the book. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
No, sorry, I'm going 1, 2, 3. उसके बाद बहस है इसके बाद आपका है
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, what I would like to ask is, Geetanjali, I believe there was in parallel, there was the translation in French. Can you tell me how did you sense the questions from the French translator in comparison to Daisy, and whether which language, in fact, to you felt it got the intention of the Hindi better? It's an unfair question, but I'd like to know.
Thank you, Munni, but I don't think I can really answer that very well. I knew the French translator. She's already done another book of mine, and she has done many other writers that I know. I also know how well versed in Hindi, in the linguistic culture, the changing linguistic cultures of Hindi, and in North Indian culture, you know, what her pet is culture mein unki hai. So I already had that rapport with this translator. A lot of it is, of course, guesswork, but I know, you know, from the questions about language, for instance, I know how much she's enjoying these little tweaks, and she's trying to figure out the, you know, something parallel in French. So it's only a sense of it, and it's from the enjoyment that other French readers got that I could tell that she's done a marvelous job. In Daisy's case, again, there were very detailed questions which showed me how deeply she was immersing herself into it, and how much, again, she was also enjoying the playfulness and inventiveness of this book. But even as it might look that here it's English, and I know it, it's actually, again, true about English that there are so many Englishes. So it's not necessary that, you know, Daisy's English was also very much the English I knew. So even that was about seeing it a little, you know, sensing, after a point, just trusting it and sensing it that she is able to do very good work there, and people are enjoying it. So in both, in some ways, it's not so dissimilar, even though it may look that I know English and I don't know French. Have I made any sense at all?
Yes. Annie Monto was the wonderful translator who was so much a part of the Hindi world, as is Daisy. The gentleman.
Ma'am, मेरा नाम अंशुल तिवारी. I'll ask the question in Hindi and maybe you can then just. पहले बात तो ये बात है कि रेत समाधि जो टाइटल है वो आपको कब आया प्रोसेस में, और रेत शब्द कब आया उसमें?
बस वो लिखने के दौरान जब रेत का जिक्र आया बार बार, अगर आपने किताब पढ़ी है तो आप खुद समझ जाएंगे इस बात को, क्योंकि बहुत बार आता है, तो रेत का जब जिक्र बार बार आ रहा था और समाधि आ रही थी और अलग अलग संदर्भ में आ रहे थे, तो मुझे लगा कि ये अच्छा टाइटल बनता है. और कृष्णा जी ने मुझसे पूछा कि मैंने क्या टाइटल दिया है, तो मैंने कहा रेत समाधि, और कृष्णा जी 2 मिनट के लिए चुप हुई. फिर उन्होंने कहा, she did this. एंड शी सेड, बहुत बढ़िया, ये तो बिल्कुल सूफ़ी है कि एक हल्का है, उड़ता है, आसमान की तरफ चला जाता है, और दूसरा गहरा है और भीतर जाता है. तो मुझे लगा कि ये तो बहुत बढ़िया टाइटल है.
That was beautiful. For those who don't know Hindi, will you give a little sense of it?
No.
If you feel up to it. Otherwise...
I'm not a translator, you know.
Okay, we'll ask Arunava to do it.
You want to say?
He speaks Bengali, so it's the same thing.
70 books.
That memo.
Okay, I'll do it. Krishna Sopti, she's talking to Krishna Sopti, correct me where I go wrong. And she's asking her that this is the title I've given it, Ret Samadhi. And Ret Samadhi, you'll have to do Krishna ji's movement. What does she do? Like that. And she says, Tomb of Sand, she likes the duality of it because the sand is flying and the
sand
tomb
is light. And
light.
It's light and it can fly.
And
the
tomb
samadhi is going in and it's deep.
So it has
So
dimensions.
She said it catches these two opposites, you know, they like for the Sufi. And
So
she
I
liked that
think
idea.
on that note, it would be a very good idea to have such a loud this thing of clapping that we forget that we set the stage on fire yesterday.
Thank you, everybody.
whatever you did, if it wasn't good enough, you needed to try and do better and keep at it.
Actually, village life produces the philosophical ideas that are germane to democratic thought and practice.
I mean, just losing 4 of your bandmates, soulmates is bad enough. But the worst thing is, out of those 4 families, 2 of the families blamed me.
But the progress from 1991 to 2017, I think, only took India to a better place.
It was really through the transition into politics that I had the good luck of becoming a writer.